Hello everybody, welcome back to the Sim Hangar. My name's Mark. Thanks for watching and let's get started. Over the past 12 to 18 months I've done a number of videos on Authentikit, and whenever we mention Authentikit peripherals we seem to be talking about Spitfires. Well, I've been reminded recently there's a lot more to Authentikit than just Spitfires. For example, I've just finished building this. It's a throttle quadrant for the P40B Tomahawk, and it features a number of new innovations, not least of which is a new dampener system which gives some real resistance to the throttle lever. And of course, it's got its mixture and prop lever as well. And as I was building that, well, I thought I might as well build the trims as well. And it features both an elevator and a rudder trim. So today we're going to be touching on the P40B and the peripherals, but more than that I wanted to touch on what's coming up, what else is there available from Authentikit, and how else am I using those peripherals. If you're not familiar with who Authentikit are and what they do, I've covered this in some detail in a number of videos, as well as their excellent freeware utility for setting sensitivity for your trim wheels. Links to these videos and the Authentikit website in the notes below. As you're probably aware, Authentikit has a focus on warbirds, but their implementation is very unique, perfect for cockpit builders, VR enthusiasts, as well as traditional flying on monitors. It puts your peripheral where they would be in the aircraft using the Authentikit rig. Peripherals are recognized in Microsoft Flight Simulator and easy to configure. And today we're going to be focusing on the P40B Tomahawk from Big Radials. But before we do that, let's touch on some of the new products coming up from Authentikit. Recent additions to the Spitfire range include the gear and the flap lever. One that's got me excited is the Throttle Quadrant for the BF109. And here's another Throttle Quadrant coming up, and you can guess what that one's for. Got a feeling that one's going to be really popular, as well as some other chunky stuff, not to mention the P51 Mustang. The attraction of the P40B controls are not limited to the Tomahawk itself. They could be used on a number of other planes. These controls here are very similar indeed, and not a million miles away from what we use on the Hellcat. Certainly be giving that a go, as well as on the T6 Texan. Not exactly the same, but close enough. Let's get back to the Tomahawk. Having your peripherals in exactly the same place as in the real aircraft and what you see in Sim just enhances your level of immersion. And of course Authentikit's compatible with Microsoft Flight Simulator IL2 and DCS. You can of course use one setup to fly most aircraft, as you can with any throttle quadrant or trim. But if you're after that authentic experience, well, it's quick and easy just to swap out your controllers, because it's a simple slide-on, slide-in mechanism. There goes the P40B trims and now the throttle quadrant. Once they're in place, it's a simple task of simply reconnecting all the cables. In my case, I've just set up a different profile within Microsoft Flight Simulator, one for the P40B Tomahawk and one for the Spitfire. As I spend most of my time in VR, well, it's just ideal. Let's jump into the P40B Tomahawk and let's test and see how things are working. Just using the brake lever on my spade stick just to take the brakes off. There we are. And now let's just set the trims for takeoff. First of all, the elevator trim. I think I'm looking for about 2 on the elevator. There we are, that's dialed in. And we'll want a bit of rudder as well, so we'll dial that in as well. This time I think I'll go for about maybe just a touch over 3. This aircraft's got a very strong pull to the left. That should do. Now we can test our throttle quadrant. First of all, the prop all the way back and forward again. That all seems to be working well. I did calibrate these controls in Windows before configuring in Microsoft Flight Simulator. That's the mixture lever. And now for the throttle. Just got to love that feedback on the throttle. There's some real resistance there, very realistic. Brakes are off and we can start to creep forward. Using the Authentikit trim application, which I referred to earlier, you can set the trim so that they turn 1-to-1 as reflected in Sim, or you can just leave them and use them as default. Now let's get out of here and let's go try fly the P40B. Before we do, however, if you're wondering how difficult they are to assemble, well, the difficulty level varies depending on what you're assembling. Trim wheels were straightforward and easy, throttle quadrant a little more difficult. It took me an afternoon. I've compressed the assembly into about a minute and a half. In addition to written instructions, Authentikit have tutorials on their website, and I'm following that. Although admittedly it probably spent more time on pause than it did on play. Let's start. I've got all the bits laid out in front of me. And from SimKit Supplies I have all the bits and pieces I need. What's interesting here is this unit uses Hall effect sensors. That's what I'm assembling right now. Oh, and this is the button that's located on the inside of the throttle. Some of the wiring is a little bit finicky and you do need to concentrate. The tutorials are by the founder of Authentikit, Phil Hume. Phil, slow down mate, I can't keep up. We're now well into the assembly and it's starting to take shape. I had assembled the elevator trims before starting on the throttle quadrant. As you're probably aware, one of the unique features is I did all of this assembly with only a couple of different screwdrivers and a magnet, as the Hall effect sensors require a magnet to be placed in a very specific direction. And we're done. Here's my trim wheel, and there's no doubt once you've completed a build there's a great sense of satisfaction. And there was even more so when I plugged it in and it all worked as expected. And so we're up in the air with the P40B. I decided to edit out my somewhat embarrassing takeoff. Clearly more practice is required on my behalf. The controls are super responsive, although between the Spitfire and the P40B I found I had to adjust the sensitivities for the Tomahawk. I found I needed them to be just a little bit less sensitive than what I do for the Spitfire. The Authentikit interface is compatible with Microsoft Flight Simulator, IL Stormovik and DCS. I don't think it's X-Plane compatible at this time, but I stand to be corrected on that. If you're into cockpit building or you're into VR and immersion is really important to you, then Authentikit is definitely worth a close look. The advantage in VR, of course, is you can just reach out and the controls are exactly where you expect them to be and where you see them in the aircraft. Far less fumbling around for that button or lever. But to be honest, I don't only fly Authentikit in VR. I do it on screen as well, and now even more so with multi-monitor and with my Tobii eye tracker. Those two combined really enhances the immersion. Throw in a butt kicker and FS realistic and well, you've just got the ultimate flight sim. As mentioned earlier, link to Authentikit's website in the notes below. And more interesting developments coming up very soon. Thank you for joining me today. Stay well, look after yourselves. I'll see you again soon, and bye for now.